Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Mateer, and I am the Director of Missional Engagement and the Conference Disaster Response Coordinator for the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We welcome you to Before the Storm, the Resilient Congregation, a framework to prepare your church and your community for peace of mind. Um, I invite you to, uh, in the chat, if you will put your name as well as your church and district, so we get to know those that are here, and you may meet some folks that you don't know that you might want to follow up with, or you might want to connect with afterwards. Like I said, I am the Conference Disaster Response Coordinator, and I represent our disaster ministries team who have grown from a couple of halftime positions to almost 30 positions over the last 20 some months since Hurricane Helene. And one of the things that we realized that we wanted to be better prepared for the future is kind of a local church preparedness. And we've developed some resources that we hope will be beneficial to local churches as they think about their own preparedness and resilience. So we're going to start and remind everybody that we are part of uh, the denominational United Methodist Church, and under that is the United Methodist Committee on Relief, and they are kind of the disaster response wing of our denomination that falls under global ministries. There are two. There's an international core, and then there's a U.S. disaster response, and obviously this falls under U.S. disaster response. But what many people don't know is there is a very small staff of UMCOR representatives. It's just three full-time people and a couple of consultants, so very small team. So UMCOR is really about resourcing the conferences, and then the conferences then in turn resource the districts and the local churches. We're going to just start with a bit of a baseline for what is a disaster. And there's a couple of key points that we want to hit on in the early part of this session. It's overwhelming physical, economic, and or emotional damage, harm to people and property. It disrupts a normal pattern of living. Sometimes it can be overwhelming to a community, and it affects individuals, families, neighborhoods, communities, and regions. And then obviously we have different types of disasters. So as we're talking about your local church preparedness, we want you to be thinking about not just what you consider floods and hurricanes or kind of environmental disasters, but what are some other disasters that you might be called to respond to? So natural disasters, technical disasters, it could be economic disasters, civil disasters, accidents, and maybe some other things that we can think of as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to our director of recovery, Maggie Armstrong, and she's going to talk a little bit about the phases of disaster as well as move us into the next portion of our time together.
Hey, I'm Maggie Armstrong. One of the things I talk about a lot in my job and when I'm talking to churches is how much we have learned over the past 2 years since Hurricane Helene and Western North Carolina Conference. And one of the things I think that many of us have felt is that disasters, um, what we need to be doing in disaster changes a lot over time. After Hurricane Helene, there was a time where it was changing every hour, then it shifted to changing every day, then it shifted to changing every week, and then every month, and now it's in like a 6 month phase. So we have got a new thing going on. And so kind of this graphic shows 5 phases of recovery. Rescue being the immediate thing that happens after the storm. This is helicopters in the air. This is getting people, if there's flooding, this is getting people out of floodwaters. This is getting people off of roofs. If there are landslides and debris flows, this is chopping through trees. This is getting people safe. The second piece is relief. In the United Methodist system, this is where the early response teams, the ERTs, come in. It is we always say that disaster starts and ends with community. And so the first people who are going to respond to your needs are your neighbors. And then we're going to bring in volunteers. And before that, we're going to bring in, not we, society as a whole is going to bring in things like the National Guard and firefighters to respond to those critical things in rescue. And then in relief, it is getting people into temporary safe situations. So it is getting people into temporary safe sanitary and secure housing. In this storm, it has looked like a lot of campers. Um, it can be restoring food systems. It can be rebuilding bridges and roads so that people have access. There were a lot of communities in Western North Carolina that were basically totally cut off after Hurricane Helene in a lot of ways. And that was really, really hard economically. It was really hard for people with medical issues. And then the next phase, which is what we are really in right now, is recovery. So sometimes it's quick and sometimes it takes a very long time. We expect that with Hurricane Helene, we will not as a state be fully recovered for probably 6 to 8 years. And so this is the drudgery of reestablishing safe, sanitary, and secure homes for survivors. This is reestablishing affordable housing, which is usually hit very hard by storms. That was definitely the case in Hurricane Helene. A lot of the communities that in the in near Asheville that served as sources of affordable housing were in low-lying valley communities. And mobile home parks suffer a lot with high winds and flooding in ways that are almost impossible to recover from in many instances. And so it's not just getting people back into their homes, but it's also reestablishing workforce housing. It is reestablishing economic stuff. Asheville is a tourist town. Western North Carolina in general is a tourist destination. A lot of our economy relies on having places for people to stay and things for them to do when they're here. And we had a lot of art communities. We had a lot of restaurants that suffered greatly during the storm. Um, the next phase, I'm gonna say Brian's thing went away. Uh, but I think the next phase that was on there was review. And that's sort of, we are continuing to be in recovery. But if you look, this is a Venn diagram. All of these phases overlap with each other. Right now, our main focus is on recovery, but we are already starting to think about kind of capturing the knowledge that we have. Again, we have learned so much, both as a conference, and as a local church. The role of the local church is so critical in disaster response and recovery because the local church is a staple of the community. It is a place where if we're doing our jobs as Christians, it is a place where people feel safe and welcomed and where they know they will be taken care of in a time of crisis. And so in this review, we're starting to think both how can the local church better serve its communities in future, and also how can we as a conference help the local church be prepared for that. And then the final one is readiness. And so this is being ready for the next thing that happens. As Brian showed earlier, the next thing that happens could be another hurricane. The next thing that happens could be um, uh, baby food shortage. It could baby formula shortage. It could be an economic downturn right now. It is really hard for people to afford groceries, and that is a crisis. And we need to think about how to be ready for stuff like that. It could be civil disturbances. It could be extreme heat waves. That is actually one of the most deadly effects of climate change is heat-related illnesses. And so it could be that you live in a town that's got a bunch of people who take the bus, and bus stops are brutal on 100-degree days. So that's the whole thing. And then the next thing happens, we rescue, we relieve, we recover, we review, we ready, and on and on and on for all of human history. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to show you a couple different tools that we've been working on in part of this review and recovery or review and readiness stage. The first one is a form that we are proposing to be added to Chart Conference. So for those of you who don't have the joy of Chart Conference, it's kind of an annual process for documenting and reporting for each local church. Um, the utility of this tool, this form, really so that we have a place that aggregates what resources are available at what church across the conference. So if Buncombe County was hit really hard right now, I know what churches have what. There's a bunch of counties in our conference where we haven't done this discovery piece. So I'm going to start with this. And the next piece is a tool is for your church to start planning its stuff for itself. So this one sits at the conference. We hope it also inspires some stuff in your church. And the second tool, which Laura, who's one of our coworkers, is going to present, is something to help you. It is a planning template tool that we think will be great for you. So questions in this form. First is who is filling out this form, just so we know where the data is coming from. The second is who is a local church disaster contact person. Sometimes that's going to be a pastor. Sometimes your church is going to have a disaster response coordinator. Sometimes it's going to be a trustees chair. That's really at the discretion of the church. Three is, do you have trained or skilled volunteers? Those can be early response teams, it can be construction teams, Spanish interpreters, spiritual and emotional support, um, other. Uh, Fourth is, in what ways would your church be open to using its space in a disaster? A lot of this happened organically after Hurricane Helene, but it's a nice thing to think about in in this readiness phase is what could we do? Meeting space is huge for community events. Meeting space is huge for disaster recovery people, for volunteers. It is huge if we were ever able to do some just-in-time disaster case management to assist survivors to navigate these kind of really complicated systems like FEMA insurance right after the storm. So meeting space, feeding sites. We have fed so many meals, thousands and hundreds of thousands of meals since Hurricane Helene because of the needs that emerged across Western North Carolina. Supply distributions. We were giving out coats in the winter. And we were giving out we were still giving out food in a lot of these places for months because our food systems were so disrupted. And then volunteer housing. If a storm happened, would your church be interested in housing volunteers who would come in maybe for 3 days at a time? That's the ERT standard, and stay, work in your community, and then head home. So then next question, which of the following facilities do your church have? Volunteer housing, RV hookups, emergency communication infrastructure, so Starlink, fiber, handheld radios, laundry facilities, built-in showers. A large parking lot can be really helpful for staging, for organizing. In Spruce Pine, we had police department came in from I think Huntersville and actually used the parking lot at Spruce Pine UMC as a base of operations as they were doing search and rescue. And then also the things you'll need to hook up a shower trailer in case you were interested in hosting one. And then another question, which of the following non-facility resources does your congregation have? So church-owned utility trailers and haulers. Do you have a farmer? Oh, no, that's not do you have a farmer? Does your church own a utility trailer or a hauler? Second is congregation-owned utility trailers and haulers. Do you have farmers? Do you have construction people who might be interested in using their personal trucks and trailers in an urgent disaster scenario to help move supplies? And then just miscellaneous disaster supplies. So sometimes churches store flood buckets or hygiene kits or tarps, things like that. Next question, very basic. Would your church be open to hosting volunteers? And then what additional capacity does your church or congregation have? Alternative power source, solar, generator, things like that. Spanish speakers, ASL interpreters, licensed social workers. These are all going to be like select as many as apply. And then licensed mental health workers, truck and trailer drivers, volunteer base, financial resources, and other. And then the final one is going to be, do you have a local church disaster plan? And this is what Laura is going to show next. Yes, where is it held? When was it last updated? Who maintains it? And if no, are you interested in creating a church disaster plan? This form will be really, really helpful if in a Helene type scenario, because what might happen is there could be something in a county where our disaster staff does not know all of the resources that are available. We can get on to the church conference forum, look and query any churches that have said they're open to hosting volunteers, take it down to any that already have showers, any that have shower trailer hookups. And then we get on the phone and we call and we say, hey, how are you doing? How is the recovery? How are you holding up in this time? Is your church actually interested in doing this and this? And can we get you the resources that you need to do so? So I think this could be a very, very cool tool in helping the conference disaster staff understand where to start when we are working in a rescue and a relief phase. And so then I'm going to hand it over to Laura now, and she's going to share this disaster plan that the last couple questions centered on, that really is a tool for your church to be ready and to think through what a disaster, what would be happening in your church in disaster. It's something that we would really encourage your church to have digitally in several places. We would encourage your church to mail a copy to the conference office, and we would encourage a couple of hard copy versions of this form throughout your church, so that it can be accessed in a disaster. Laura, take it away.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Maggie. I'll just point out that Brian in the chat mentioned that if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in there. Let me get the other document pulled up. Great. Can everyone see that? Maybe? There we go. Great. Okay, so like Maggie mentioned, this is a tool for you, for the local church, for your organization. This is going to be an internal document that hopefully you will share with the conference so that when a disaster does hit, the conference is able to have access to it to reach out and help you. It is formatted in an Excel sheet, which we hope will be user-friendly for you, but we still are working out some bugs, so have some grace with that. While it isn't an Excel sheet here, it will also be printed, like Maggie said, hopefully stored in a binder somewhere. And so think of this first page as the first page of your binder. You're going to put your church name in there. You're going to put your district and a signature that says this has been updated. It has been looked at recently. It is an accurate representation of your disaster plan. With that, I'm just going to orient us really quickly. The first couple of slides of the Excel sheet are for orienting you to thinking about disaster. And since Brian and Maggie just did a great job of offering some ways to think about disaster, we can move through those pretty quickly, just hitting some key points. The second half of this form is going to be actual spreadsheets, checklists, text box for you to put in your disaster plan. And we'll move through those form by form as well.
Can I add something?
Please.
For those of you who are scared of spreadsheets, she set it up in a really brilliant way where the only thing you can actually change are the boxes that are unlocked. So anything that's in blue here, you can actually write in. So it's it'll be kind of like a fillable PDF, just a little bit easier to navigate.
Yep. And you can always print it and fill it out and scan it as well.
One additional thing I'd like to add is it is important to have that GCFA number. Your clergy person will know that if you do not, but there are a lot of First United Methodists, and sometimes people may not put exactly how their church is. So if you have that GCFA number that identifies your church specifically with the location as well as the clergy and staff that you may have, or so that's super helpful.
Great, thank you. Okay, and into the weeds a little bit. First, this is an overview. I'm not going to hit on this too much. Again, Brian and Maggie just gave you a great overview of how we at Disaster Ministries approach thinking about preparedness for churches. I will just highlight that this form, again, is for your church. Your church is going to have a different capacity than the church 2 blocks away from you. And so not all of these forms might fit what you have or fit what you need, and some of them you might need to beef up a little bit as well. So just be aware of that. Be aware that this is a flexible tool that you can use in creative ways and as you best see fit. Okay, this is another page that Brian and Maggie just went over. What is a disaster? I'll just hit some other points here as well. Like Brian said, disasters are not just hurricanes. So we're going to see wildfires and heat waves, and maybe some social disruptions as well. So thinking about disasters in a well-rounded way is going to be really important in filling out this form as well. Also, at the bottom of this page is some language to think about disaster and more of a church-focused, church-led approach, which can be helpful if you're working with congregants who maybe weren't here for Helene and maybe don't have a full picture of why disaster preparedness is so critical. I'd love to touch on this last point, that disaster preparedness is a form of loving your neighbor. Like Maggie said, neighbors are the first responders in times of disaster. And so the more prepared your church is, the quicker it can move from focusing on its inward needs to moving outwards and thinking about what it means to love your neighbor in times of emergency, crisis, and disaster. The next page is organization. So we have a suggestion for how you should think about a disaster planning team as the starting point to your disaster preparedness. A lot of these positions your church might already have incorporated into their structure, and also should have incorporated into your structure, hopefully. But the disaster team leader highlighted here in bold is probably a new one for you. And so we'll go over what that role will look like and what a good person to fill that role might look like as well. This is a role you're going to want to establish pre-disaster as you're filling out this plan. Someone who's detail-oriented, self-motivated, flexible, someone who feels like they can be responsible for filling out this form, which might be a heavier lift than you are prepared to do right now. Also working with other organizations, not just your internal church, and also coordinating volunteers. Your trustee representative on a disaster planning team is going to be focused on facility maintenance preparation. And so they're also a key person to get their hands on this form and look at it. You're going to have some optional team members as well, depending on what fits your church best. I'd like to highlight here the donations manager. Especially at the beginning of crisis, churches can get a lot of material donations. So soup cans, baby formula, water bottles, and having someone who can know where those are and find places for them to be stored and dispersed is really going to streamline any disaster response that your church is doing. Beyond that, some other things to keep in mind that we saw after Helene that worked really well were telephone trees, making sure that you know that your congregants can be accounted for, making sure you know where they need help, who needs help, what kind of help they need, and identifying congregants who might need a special attention or needs during a time of disaster. I might pause for questions there since that was a lot. If anyone has any questions specifically about organization, I can take them now, or you can pop them in the chat and we can circle back to them later.
I'm not seeing any hands.
Great. Okay. The chat is always open. Page 4 is general information and suggestions that is helpful to turn to once you have started thinking through how to establish your disaster response team. Again, a long document. I'm not going to read through all of it now, but I do want to highlight that disaster preparedness works best when your church plays into the strengths that it already has. So if you have a mission and a ministry of feeding people, you might already have the infrastructure for that. You might already have a commercial kitchen, and starting with that as a start to your disaster preparedness and disaster response, thinking through how you could utilize that in a disaster is a great starting point. Similarly, if you have a daycare, thinking about how that might have to change and serve differently during a time of disaster is helpful. The other thing I want to highlight here is that in a time of disaster, there's a large weight on your clergy and other spiritual leaders in your church. So thinking through how you can best support them, I think this is why the role of disaster team lead is so important. That person should not be a clergy member. Your clergy should be able to focus on the spiritual emotional care aspect and also for taking care of themselves as well. So just balancing that workload, spreading it across different members of your congregation is best practice. Okay, that was section 1, orientation. Now we're getting into big spreadsheets. This page 5, that is not loading super well right now, is going to be like your table of contents for all of the templates and forms. And so instead of going through this page, I'll just go ahead and walk through each form, but you have them broken up into different sections. The first 4 that we'll go through are what we're going to be calling required. These are just pretty basic information. Who's on your disaster response team, their emergency contacts, who are your vendors, like your plumbers, your electricians, who are you gonna call in the case that your church facility is hit hard by a disaster in one way or another. Other sorts of forms and templates we have are more broad. They're not necessarily fill in the XYZ chart here. They're more spaces to think about what pastoral care might look like for your specific context during a disaster. Are there specific needs that your community has that you need to prep for beforehand? And then, of course, a facilities and materials checklist. What does your church need to do to protect its building in times of disaster? So, starting off, this part should be pretty straightforward, hopefully. Your local church information. Where is your church? What is the name of it? What is the church's contact information? If you have a second campus, add that on there. If you have a parsonage, please include that as well. Like Maggie said, this is set up so you can edit the light blue color, and of the other colors you shouldn't really have to worry about. You can't do too much damage to this. Here are some other personnel information that you should have: your chair of trustees, your finance chair. Yep, great. Okay. 2 is the contact information for your disaster planning team, also straightforward. This is a document that can ebb and flow. You might not want to have one person centered as your disaster team lead all the time. If there are things that come up and they're feeling burnt out, it can be a good idea to kind of spread that around a little bit. Here is an other form, because again, your church contacts might look at what this form is set up for. You can edit this, you can add a different position. On that should be pretty straightforward. And then form 3 is for emergency contacts. So your pastor's emergency contact, your associate pastor's emergency contact, the district superintendent's office, the Western North Carolina Conference office. I'll probably go ahead and fill this in for you since that should be pretty standard. You also want to add your insurance carrier. This is probably stored somewhere else in your church, but this whole document is kind of a go bag for when a disaster hits. So making sure that all of that information is in one spot so you can just grab one binder and go is what we're hoping to offer to you. So the insurance carrier, your water district, the gas company, the electric company, as well as local Red Cross shelters that could be helpful contacts for you, and then local emergency contacts as well, once you start thinking about that broader kind of relief phase. Next section is vendors, similar to thinking about your plumber and electrician, which are here again. Who is going to fix your HVAC system? Who is going to get the mold out of your basement? Do you have already a vendor for that? If you are a church that has a lot of food suppliers, do you have a go-to contact for that as well? Okay, those are the 4 required ones. This is an evacuation plan you can upload here, and then you'll be able to print it out all in one place. If you don't have a facility evacuation plan, recommend that you get one and that you post it in visible and highly trafficked areas. This is helpful in case of fires mostly, but there are other situations where it can be helpful to have an evacuation plan posted. Form is for alternate facilities and for forming a communication plan. In the case that your church is not able to open and operate, you might want to find a off-site worship location for Sunday mornings, Wednesday evenings, whatever your church pattern looks like. Also finding an alternate office location for your staff. A public information officer is going to be the primary spokesperson to any media inquiries or social media posts. Again, depending on your church, you may or may not need to fill this position. A lot of the times the default is just going to be the senior pastor, so feel free to consider that as an option. Offsite social media and communication capabilities. This is going to be important, especially if your church decides to set up a feeding site or is acting as a distribution center. So knowing how to access your social media if you have it so that your community members can know that something is happening, knowing how to update your church website if you need to meet in a new location. Again, depending on your church, this may or may not be helpful. This bottom section is a reciprocal facility agreement. So you might have an offsite secondary location and you might be the secondary location for someone else. This is also helpful to think through if you do have a daycare or other like during the week programming. Finding and trading and sharing your spaces is something that disasters ask of us often. Okay, this next section is going to be a copy of your charge conference forms. We're hoping you can download them and put them in here again so that this is a go bag of all of your information so that you do not have to look up all of the other information that you may need in the case of a disaster. And this is an asset inventory form, which would be helpful for insurance as well. So if you have any high-priced items, computers, other technology pieces, vehicles, any of that kind of stuff, make sure that you are documenting them and storing them in a safe place. Okay. This is the pastoral care worksheet. We aren't going to tell you how to do pastoral care, and we also aren't going to ask for private information of your congregants, but having a space that encourages you to think through, hey, are there people in my congregation who have mobility issues? Can they get out of their house if a flood hits? Are there people who need a language interpreter or an ASL interpreter? All of those sort of things. Are members of my congregation hard of hearing? Do they need help with warning signs if that is a situation that arises? Especially for homebound members, this can be really critical. And so again, just thinking through who are those people who might be at the top of your phone call list when you get a warning about a storm, a fire, heat, especially if there are members without air conditioning, without heat in their homes. This can be a good place to think through what they might need and how your church can best serve them as well. This section is now the facilities maintenance checklist. So your trustees share, or whoever on your disaster planning team is on the board of trustees is probably going to want to have a hand in this. So things like checking the roof and the foundations of your building annually. This is where we really get into the disaster preparedness part of how far in advance can we set ourselves up for success in the times where things aren't going how they normally are. Testing smoke detectors and making sure that their batteries are operating, inspecting water heaters, cleaning out your gutters and drains. These kind of just day-to-day or annual tasks. This section is blank because, again, your church building might have other things that need to be checked. So feel free to add and subtract as needed. This next section is a list of on-site supplies that will be helpful to have before any kind of disaster is on the horizon, or if you're getting a warning far in advance. So a copy of your disaster plan is going to be number one. Having this plan stored digitally and in a fire safe box, or in a safe, or just somewhere where you know where it is. You don't have to go scrambling around on a pile of binders to find. Things like water stored up, plastic goods, battery powered radios, first aid kits, masks. So if we're facing air pollution or hazardous material, having some kind of mask on hand can be helpful. Plastic garbage bags, work gloves, power saws, bleach, disinfectants, nails, hammers. All of these things might be helpful to have on hand. Okay, warning checklists. These are going to be checklists that you turn to when a warning has been issued for a number of different disasters, emergencies, crises, etc. This first one here is for mostly rain and wind related events. So make sure that you close blinds and curtains for the church to minimize damage from broken windows. Make sure you have a backup of your important documents. File away secure materials. Protect your electronic and technological equipment. If you have outside furniture or garbage cans, put them inside so the wind doesn't blow them away. Make sure your sheds are locked. Check that your doors are secure. And then if you choose as a church to be a site that really focuses on community response in times of disaster, make sure that your supplies are ready for that as well. For things like wildfire or other fire events, it's similar. Cover your window panes, remove your flammable curtains, make sure you have your important documents in a safe and secure location, protect your computers. Filling your sinks with water so that if fire hits your church, the firemen might need a water source, so that can be helpful. A lot of these, there might be some overlap between the checklists. For a fire, also shut off your gas and propane lines. A disruptive community event. So think a civil disturbance, someone shows up at your church with a warrant, a numerous number of things. Make sure that you have a plan for this. So the biggest thing for this kind of disruptive community event is to think about it beforehand and have, whether it's an usher or a greeter or someone else in your church who knows what to do in case that this might happen. If you need to have certain documents on hand, having something like that can be helpful. Extreme heat. So Brian is also in charge of some creation care stuff, so I know this is a good area for him. But if your church is willing and able to be a cooling center where you have air conditioning and water open to the community members in times of extreme heat, that can save lives, absolutely. So there are some links here as well that link back to the Western North Carolina's website about what it would mean to be a cooling center. You can check it out. So think through if that's something that your church would be interested in doing. Think through if there are members in your church who are going to be especially affected by extreme heat. So people who might have to walk to school, to work, people who don't have AC in their homes. Again, always securing your important materials and papers. This might be a good opportunity to buy water in bulk and buy electrolyte mixers to distribute information about how to act in times of public health, taking more breaks if you are outside for long periods of time. And again, if you are choosing to serve as a cooling center, making sure that you have the materials on hand to do that. Severe winter weather, ice, hail, snow, etc. Wrapping your pipes in insulation. Again, contacting members who might have to be outside a lot. Shutting off water. Locate and know where your water valves are. Inspect your heating unit if you hopefully you have a heating unit. And then trimming trees, overgrown trees, so that additional snowfall doesn't break them off and make them fall on your buildings. There's also a list of other incidents to consider. you can determine if these are something that your church needs to think through as well. At the end of all of that, you make it to the congratulations page where you can send this in to Disaster Ministries at Western North Carolina or at wnccumc.org. And also print it out. Make sure that it is stored safely in your church, and as well as maybe share a digital copy among your disaster response plan and your trustee members. And then at the end is a revision sheet. If you go up and make an update, just make sure that there's documentation of that so that you know that a change has been made and you can refer back to it. That was a lot of information. Thank you for bearing with me. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them or make Maggie and Brian take them as well.
First off, I would like to thank Laura. We're lucky to have her. She is a Duke Div summer intern working with Disaster Ministries. She's awesome. We're just grateful to work with her, and she did a lot of the work while we had a lot of input from a lot of different areas. Laura kind of compiled all this together, looked at other conferences and what they're doing for local church preparedness, and then formatted it in its current form. So, as she said, we do have a couple of revisions we're working on, and a couple of things that we want to think through before sending out live. But we will make sure that everybody that is on this call will receive that, and then we'll be doing a larger kind of communication push to encourage congregations to do the local church preparedness plan. So we are happy to answer questions. So you're welcome to put them in the chat or hop off of mute and answer that, and we'll try to do so. And if there are none, then we will close our time in prayer, and we'll be following up with you all.
Y'all are easy.
Yeah, I know. All right.
One question I have, Brian, this is the thought I just had right now. Would one of the things we'd like to do before publishing this widely is get a few churches to test it out, to play with it, to see if there are other things that we think might be included. Would anyone on this call think being a first little guinea pig with this tool? To start thinking through what ways it's useful, what ways it could be improved. Yeah, would anybody be interested in that? No is a perfectly fine answer.
Or if you're certainly welcome to let us know after the fact if
Yeah.
you don't want to let us know now.
Ooh, Ursula said she would be willing to look it over. She was on a hospital emergency response. That's awesome.
Okay, that'd be wonderful.
Yes, Ursula.
Thank you. Ursula, would you mind sending your email, putting it in the chat or direct messaging one of our team members so we can follow up with you? Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments? All right, let's pray together. Gracious God, thank you for this time of learning, reflection, and preparation. As we seek to strengthen our congregations and communities, grant us wisdom to plan well, courage to lead faithfully, and compassion to serve those in need. Before the storms of life arise, help us to build resilient churches rooted in faith, hope, and love. May we be a source of strength, healing, and encouragement for our neighbors, trusting always in your presence and in your guidance. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Have a good night. Bye, guys. Maggie, I see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Thank you,
Mhm.
Monique.